3 things you should know about Beijing, the soon-to-be 100 million person megacity. This is Jeffrey Towson at Peking University in Beijing. This integration of these cities, Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei, into one sort of mega city, it's sort of a special case of a larger China phenomenon, and that's this development of city clusters. They call it Jing-Jin-Ji, these 3 regions combined. But we've actually seen this before. If you look at the Pearl River Delta in the south, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, in that area, that was another sort of larger version of this. Or you could look at the Yangtze River Delta around Shanghai, Nanjing, and that's a similar phenomenon. Both of these are major pillars of the economy. I think what's going on here in Beijing is going to be like that. I just tend to think it's going to happen a lot faster because this is Beijing, it's the capital, and this is really the major part of the northern economy. This cluster being developed. Anyways, I'm going to take you down to Tiananmen Square, talk about this a little bit more. So all of this raises the question of what does a 100 million person city look like? And the truth is you don't really see it. You walk down the street, it's not so busy. You go to the mall, it's not so busy. Sometimes the roads are a little busy. So I thought every now and then though you do see a certain percentage of people showing up in one place, and it's pretty overwhelming. So as a little bit of a sort of a taste of that, I thought I'd come down here to Tiananmen Square. And it's not just a normal week, it is Golden Week, which means this city is filled with people. And this plaza is filled with people. So I thought that would maybe provide a little glimpse into what this is like. I'm going to try and get over in where the people are if security doesn't stop me. Here's a little better shot. So I'm going to zoom in and show you the crowds across the street. This is Tiananmen Square. It is full of people today. Now there's 2 young boys here who want to interview me for schoolwork. Not going to show their faces, but they have their homework assignments. Okay. So some 2 young boys with their parents interviewed me for a homework assignment to practice their English. That is actually pretty common. If you go to a tourist site like this, tends to happen fairly regularly. And sometimes they all come in a bus, so if you're in a town and the buses have shown up, you'll get stopped all day long. And see flags pretty much everywhere. And a gigantic fruit bowl. So on the topic of the megacity, I think one way to think about this is the infrastructure. And I think a lot of what's been going on in the last couple years is really just about the infrastructure. It's building the roads, it's building the bridges. The 7th ring road of Beijing now goes all the way into Hebei. So it's a lot about just laying down the infrastructure and the foundation. And what comes next, I think, is much more interesting, which is all the intangibles. Culture, people, families, companies moving back and forth. Now that that sort of infrastructure is there, I think it's going to get a lot more interesting. One of the young boys pointed out to me that these flowers are for this week and are not always here. I didn't know that. You can also see military coming up. I generally think, I don't know what the rules are for filming military, but I probably shouldn't do that. One last point, I've said it's a lot about people, 100 million people in one place. It's a lot about the infrastructure that's been put in place. which gives a lot of leeway for other things to happen. And I think one of those things will be corporate headquarters and corporations. Depending on what numbers you believe, global companies, about 100 of them have their headquarters here in this area. That's really interesting because people are social animals. They're going to interact a lot. There's going to be a lot of benefits to having that sort of concentration of large companies in one place. Definitely looking for an escape from the crowds at this point. This is Wangfujin. Really nice mall. Has two good things about it. Two things I really like. One, there's a Starbucks up here on the first level that not many people know about, so it's never crowded. And second, this Hyatt has a really good bar. I think I'm going to the bar. I'm back at Beida now. I wanted to just show you very quickly what is my favorite map of China. This is a map over my shoulder here of the country by cluster. A cluster is a group of cities tightly interconnected, typically 25 cities, usually 50 to 60 million people per city. And when you map the country out this way, it looks a lot more like a series of islands than it does, sort of an integrated economy, a sort of continental economy like Europe or the US. But these clusters today, of which there are about 20, that represents about 80% of the GDP. So when thinking about what's really going on in Beijing right now with this sort of mega cluster, I find this is a very useful picture to keep in mind. One more chart that's worth keeping in mind is this very simple line chart. This is basically urbanization in China over the past 40 years or so. In 1980, 20% of the population was in cities, the rest was in the countryside. That's in comparison to, say, the US or Europe, where it's more like 80% at the same time. And it's just been this gradual process of people moving into cities, cities being built out. All of this sort of follows from that. Right now it's about 600 to 700 million people in cities, which is about 60%. And if it keeps going, which is expected, it'll go up to about 75 to 80%. So that's another 300 million people on the way. Overall, when it gets to sort of Europe levels, you're probably talking about 1 billion people living in cities. So this is kind of a great trend to just keep in mind that this is a huge economic phenomenon and it's continuing. A final thought, back in the office now, it's sort of the end of the day here. It's fun to look at these big numbers, but I'm an observer. The aspect of this that interests me in terms of day-to-day is the consumer side. And in that regard, it's all fantastic. More and more people move into the city, your population grows, wealth, GDP per capita tends to grow as concentration grows. That's all great. But the challenges underneath this sort of endeavor are pretty amazing to think about. If you're running one of these local governments and you're dealing with this massive influx of people integrating these cities, all the questions you'd have to answer every year. How many police do you need? What policies do we need? Do we need to build more subways? Of which the answer is always yes. How do we deal with the congestion? What about pollution? Do we have enough green spaces? Building on this scale, it's a pretty unprecedented thing. And balancing sort of the economic goals with the sustainability, with lifestyle, that's a really difficult question. It's fascinating. I'm just glad it's not one I have to answer because it's pretty tough. Thank you for watching. This is Jeff Towson from Peking University in Beijing.